Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo, taking a look at today's 8-game slate on FanDuel and DraftKings. Decent-sized Monday slate here. We have a couple pitching options. It seems fairly straightforward, but you do have a couple of GPP pivot moves that you can make. No real weather concerns here. Everything expected to play clean tonight, which is always nice. Diving into the first game here, we got Boston and Baltimore. Dylan Bundy taking on Stephen Wright. Bundy, obviously a guy who can be on at times. He's often kind of boomer bust. Does allow the long ball, a guy who will rely on that slider quite a bit. That slider is obviously very nasty. He throws about 26% of the time this year. Whiff rate on it about 58%. You don't have a ton of Boston bats that hit sliders particularly well. You do have a lot of lower contact rates. Andrew Benintendi is one of the guys that does stand out here. 353 WOBA, 227 ISO against sliders, decent contact rate, 72%. Bundy's been a little bit more vulnerable from the left side in terms of a lower strikeout rate. Fly balls are obviously there. 366 WOBA allowed this season. It has allowed a 260 ISO to right-handers, but that's a little bit more boomer bust with a 34% strikeout rate. It's just a matter of that fastball if he hangs that slider. You do have a couple guys that do obviously stand out against this range of fastball. Xander Bogaerts, 261 ISO, 442 WOBA. JD Martinez, 404 ISO, 448 WOBA. Mitch Moreland, 213 ISO. Eduardo Nunez, 438 WOBA, 250 ISO. He does have Nunez does have a decent contact rate against that slider as well. These guys are all viable as usual. Boston, obviously a good offense. Are they my favorite offense on the board? Definitely not. I'm not getting tremendously crazy at some of these price tags. Obviously, you have a little bit better places to go, like Cleveland, in a much better spot. You have Chicago in a good spot. You have the Cardinals as well. So those offenses I'm looking a little bit more towards, just because Bundy is a guy who can't shut down offenses, and that shut down Boston before. So don't mind these guys. If you want to look for cheaper options in the back half of the lineup, like Devers, Holt, Jackie Bradley Jr., can certainly do so, just because Bundy's not as effective against lefties. Only a 21% strikeout rate this season. As mentioned, in 366 WOBA, allowed 189 ISO. So you can certainly go with the lefties here. You can obviously use Martinez and Bogaerts. You can obviously stack up Boston. It is a favorable ballpark. Baltimore does not have a good bullpen, so obviously they get to Bundy early. It's kind of smooth sailing from there on out, but not a bad spot. Bundy, probably not a guy I'm tremendously excited about to use in GPPs tonight. Does have some strikeout upside, but still, I'm probably going to be looking elsewhere. Baltimore side things, Stephen Wright pitched pretty well in his debut against Detroit. Obviously, he is a knuckleballer. Will throw that knuckleball 80-90% of the time. We'll get some strikeouts with it, but also will walk a ton of batters. We've seen that before. Wright was, 5,300 last time out against Detroit. Is priced up a little bit here. In terms of SP2s, if you want to go there in GPPs, that's fine. It's just a high risk, high reward play. Looking at Baltimore bats that hit knuckleball as well. Obviously, it's an extremely limited sample size, but there aren't a lot of lower contact bats here. There's, most of these guys are over 70%. You do have a couple of guys with double-digit batted ball events. Jonathan Scope has the best numbers: 559 WOBA, 643 ISO, and a 77% contact rate if you're looking for some knuckleball stuff. Everyone's cheap here. They're all viable cheap one-offs, just because knuckleballs can get caught up in the wind here. Somewhat warm night in Baltimore. Baltimore projected for over 4.5 runs. I don't mind the Machados and Jones and Mark Trumbos and Scopes here. It's the power bats that you're looking at against right-handers. You got Jones over 200 ISO, Machado over 200 ISO, Scope 183 ISO. Bat that needs to start coming around a little bit more before I start feeling consistent using him. But all these guys are still cheap. Really looking at them outside of like Machado, a lot of these guys are just kind of GPP one-offs for me. If you want to stack because there's a potential here that they can walk and get to the pen early, you can certainly do so. But like I said, it's high risk, high reward here to targeting against Stephen Wright. San Francisco, Miami, Madison Bumgarner pitching on the hill again, Wei Chen. It was good to see Bumgarner get out there. Didn't pitch particularly well. We didn't see the strikeouts against Arizona. I don't mind him here in this spot. He's got a game under his belt. He's in a good, favorable ballpark. I know we usually like to target Bumgarner at home, but this is a Miami team. Projected lineup 304 WOBA, 142 ISO against left-handers this year. Not a ton of strikeouts in this lineup. You have guys like Justin Bour, Lewis Brinson. That's kind of about it. There aren't a ton of strikeouts. He has some decent contact bats, but obviously Bumgarner is a guy who can dial him up at times. Whiff rate was there on that cutter. We'd like to see, a little bit better production of his sinker. But overall, this is a guy who's obviously, a guy we usually pay, 11, 12K for. He's 10-4 against the Marlins team. Giants heavy favorites. So I don't mind using Bumgarner here, especially if you're not feeling completely comfortable with like a Carlos Carrasco, who's a bit of a wild card. But still, we got Bumgarner in a good spot. I don't really have any interest in picking on him here. Other side of things here, though, I definitely don't mind some Giants bats. I know it's not the greatest ballpark in the world, but they do have some cheap bats that you can look here. Buster Posey, obviously a name that you can toss out behind the dish. He's got a 362 WOBA, 215 ISO against left-handers. That low fastball range that Wei Chen throws, you're definitely looking at some of these bats like Posey, 466 WOBA, 308 ISO. In fact, he's only 4K. It's a nice catcher price. Obviously, guys like Andrew McCutchen, we know will start coming around against lefties here. Things will start to show. Guy's got a 47% hard contact rate. He's not hitting the ball in the ground. Just striking out a little bit more this year against lefties, but it's coming. 454 xWOBA. Definitely don't mind some McCutchen here. Evan Longoria has been hitting the ball really well against lefties this season. 374 WOBA, 296 ISO, certainly in play. Even guys like Mac Williamson you can look to use here. And I know Brandon Crawford, obviously a lefty-on-lefty matchup, but Crawford back, 385 WOBA, 237 ISO against lefties this year, 33% our contact rate. Definitely going to be an overlooked part of this Giants team. So really, if Gorkis Hernandez is in the lineup, I know he's been banged up, questionable. If he's in the lineup, 1 through 6, you can look here, stack them up. Chen's a guy who obviously does allow some power. He is in a favorable ballpark, but 382 WOBA, 267 ISO allowed to right-handers this year, 44% fly ball rate, 38% hard contact rate. So a lot of these guys stand out. McCutchen against that low velocity fastball, 515 WOBA, 250 ISO. Longoria, 384 WOBA, 344 ISO. So I definitely don't mind the Giants here. They're a good value team. They're a good value stack on tonight's slate. Toronto, Tampa. This one's always fun because we got Ryan Yarbrough on the slate versus Sam Gaviglio. Gaviglio is a guy I don't mind here. 23% strikeout rate this year, 54% ground ball rate. He was a guy in the past whenever he got in. He's got good ground ball stuff. He does limit the damage, especially to right-handers this year. 62% ground ball rate. Hard contacts average, it's right around about 32.5% to both sides. A guy who will rely on that sinker, a good amount, 57% of the time. But, he's got a good slider as well, 38% whiff rate on it, throwing about 25% of the time. Obviously, this is a team that doesn't hit sliders particularly well. Joey Wendell's the only one, but 65% 65% contact rate, nothing too useful. As far as the sinker goes, there are a couple of names, obviously like CJ Cron, Jacob Bowers are a couple of names that do stand out against it, but Bowers obviously a limited sample size, better contact numbers, but this is a team that's also pounding that sinker into the ground quite a bit. Rays 4 run total, Jay's kind of barely favored here. It is a good ballpark for Gaviglio. It's tough to obviously get power in the trop. I think he's an interesting SP2. He has some strikeout upside in the spot as well. So I definitely don't mind him. If you're looking at target against him, it really is. It's Joey Wendell, it's CJ Cron, it's Wilson Ramos. If you want to take a shot on Jacob Bowers, you can certainly do so as well. But generally a guy that I don't usually stack against. Other side of this one, Toronto's a team that we're going to be basically going for the bullpen here in the spots. I don't mind the Teoscar Hernandez play here in this one. Yarbrough's a guy that has actually been pretty good against right-handers, but you're only going to see him for a little bit. Lefties, Have tagged him a little bit more, 324 WOBA, 246 ISO this season, hard contact 34%. Problem is you're just not going to get any lefties. It's the switch hitters will go over to the right side. But I don't mind it. I think Solarte is an interesting option here in this spot. A guy who has some pop against lefties and righties this year. Justin Smoke you can look at here as well. Kendrys Morales, interesting, cheaper option at 3,200. Back half of the lineup, Leonidas Diaz is always something to get interested in. Hasn't hit lefties particularly well, but if he's only going to see a lefty in this spot once and then see a long reliever, which we've seen Pruitt come in, we've seen Andrews come in, which is kind of similar. Both those guys I don't mind targeting. So you have some options in this Toronto lineup you can certainly look at. They're all kind of contrarian guys in the spot. It's not the greatest ballpark or offensive spot in the world, but they are viable here. Jose Quintana take on Junior Guerra next. You got the Cubs and Brewers, pretty crucial division series, two battling it out in the NL Central. Jose Quintana has been a guy who's just been so up and down this year. 24% strikeout rate, obviously not bad there, but the 11% walk rate is really what we're kind of been talking about for a good amount. But I mean, even when, guys are making contact off him, 39% hard contact rate, 37% fly ball rate this season to righties. We've seen a couple righties do some damage off of him. Whiff rates are not as high as I'd like them to be on some of his secondary pitches. His fastball is getting hit pretty hard, 39% hard contact rate, 205 ISO this year. If we're looking at the curveball, this is the one thing that he does have going for him in this spot. There aren't a lot of great, bats against his curveball. Braun, 226 ISO, 40% hard contact rate, but just a 69% contact rate. The only higher contact rate bat is Lorenzo Cain, who obviously we like here tonight in this spot. 475, a little bit 261 ISO against lefties, doing his usual thing. Quintana in this ballpark, I don't particularly love it. I think I'm going to be rather taking some shots on like Cain, Braun, Aguilar, Hernan Perez, Manny Pineapple in these spots. I like the right-handed bats just because we have seen Quintana struggle, and we have seen him struggle with the long ball a little bit. So if this game was in Wrigley with the wind blowing in a little bit or a more favorable ballpark, I think I'd have interest in Quintana. If you want to go here in GPPs, I don't hate it. I just 8-game slate. I'm still finding some other pictures. There's a couple other that we're going to get to in the later games in similar price range that I think I'd rather go with. But Cain, Braun, Aguilar, all interest options. If Perez gets in the lineup, he's in play. Aguilar's just absolutely crushed left-handers this year. 448 WOBA, 361 ISO. Her contact through the roof, 46%. Same with Braun, 46%. If you want to toss in a Christian Yelich, you can look to do so because of her contacts there as well. But that's just kind of more if you're looking to stack them up in this spot. Cub side of things here, don't mind targeting some of these bats against Junior Guerra. He's a guy that is much better than what his numbers indicate as usual. Or sorry, it's much worse than what his numbers indicate as usual. 40% fly ball rate this year. Hard contact at both sides of play sitting right around 38, 39%. The walks go up a little bit to lefties. Fly balls right around 40%. This is a guy who's kind of mixing and matching here. He will throw his fastball a decent amount. His fastball's got some regression coming for it. Will throw that sinker, 24% of the time as well. Same thing, has some regression coming for it. His splitter's his best pitch. He's not throwing it a ton, right around 11%. Looking at the guys who just kind of hit that, that 92, 93 mile per hour fastball pretty well. There's a lot of names here. I don't mind both sides, but Chris Bryant stands out here, 424, we'll put 284 ISO, dating back to 2016. Jason Hayward, 355, we'll put 162 ISO and a 90% contact rate. Ben Zobrist, 373 WOBA, Rizzo, 373, 346 ISO for Rizzo. Wilson Contreras, 439 WOBA, 293 ISO. Kyle Schwarber, of course, 355 WOBA. Addison Russell, 381 WOBA. So, I mean, you definitely don't mind some of these bats here. Javier Baez, obviously, another one that you can look at. All intriguing here in this spot. They're not badly priced outside of like Rizzo and Bryant, but you do have all these guys under 5K, at least on DraftKings. All these guys do hit sinkers particularly well. Bryant's another one who stands out, 409 WOBA, but Rizzo, 476 WOBA 356 ISO against that pitch. And you're also looking at Rizzo, which is absolutely heating up here as well. We're seeing a lot of bats now. Warmer weather starting to pick things up. June's kind of clicking. Those WOBAs and slugging percentage and all that good stuff are on the rise for some teams like Paul Goldschmidt. We're finally starting to see some things rise, so it's nice to see Rizzo get going here. But do like the lefties a little bit more: Hayward, Rizzo, Schwarber. But don't be afraid to use guys like Bryant and Contreras as well, and Baez in this spot. Plenty of upside for all these guys, and it's obviously a good ballpark to hit in. Chicago and Cleveland next here. You got Carlos Carrasco take on Lucas Giolito. Obviously, expect Indians to be a very popular offense tonight, and that's kind of, without question. Carlos Carrasco, just a guy you can hardly trust. He's been awful at times this year. It was horrendous against the Twins, horrendous against Houston. Bounce back against the Brewers, which he's done. Hard to trust, but I don't mind him here in the spot against the White Sox. It's obviously a team that does strike out quite a bit. I mean, against right-handed pitching, 298, 162 ISO in the projected lineup tonight. Strikeout rate right around 24%. So fine with Carrasco. The ownership will be there with him. If you want to fade, I certainly get that too. 24% strikeout rate this year. His walks usually don't limit a ton. Guy who doesn't allow usually a ton of power, a little bit to righties at times. The whiff rate's still there on most of his pitches. I mean, his curveball 38%, that he's throwing 30% of the time this year. Changeup and slider, both 45, 46% whiff rate. I don't obviously mind Carrasco. If you're looking to be really contrarian, you're trying to look at maybe the power bats here, like Abreu, Davidson, Palka, Moncada. That's kind of about it if you're really looking to be there. But Indians 230 favorites. You got the White Sox projected for a 3.6 run total. I definitely don't mind Carrasco. He's got plenty of upside on this slate. I'm gonna go back to the well there and play the process. Cleveland side of things, obviously this is a great spot. It's a great ballpark. Lucas Giolito is a guy who allows a ton of stolen bases, allows a lot of production to left-handed hitters. 396 WOBA, 220 ISO this year, 45% 45% fly ball rate. When you line up, 6-7 lefties here against him, that's a problem. We'll start here with with Francisco Lindor, 261 ISO, 350 WOBA this year. Absolutely crushes that fastball range that he throws. He's throwing that fastball quite a bit. 57% of the time throwing a 92, 91 mile per hour fastball. Lindor, 396 WOBA, 248 ISO. You have Brantley, Ramirez, Encarnacion all over 400 WOBA against the pitch, all over 300 ISO against the pitch as well. Yonder Alonso, not great numbers against that fastball, but 370 xWOBA they met last year, still a good hard contact rate. Jason Kipnis, 389 WOBA, 192 ISO. Lonnie Chisenhall, 440 WOBA, 300 ISO. And you got guys like Greg Allen back here, Lonnie Chisenhall, Yan Gomes, Jason Kipnis, Yonder Alonso to get cheaper lefty exposure to against Giolito. So feel free to dive back there. Obviously, you can pay up and use Brantley, Lindor, Ramirez. But if you want to go with a Ramirez, Alonso, Kipnis, Chisenhall stack, certainly go for it. I mean, really, all these guys are in play here against Giolito, who's been one of the worst pitchers in baseball so far this season. His walk rate is higher than his strikeout rate. That says anything at all to you. So feel free to go with Cleveland here. They are my favorite offense on the night. You can stack them up. Will come with some ownership, but hard to really say no there. Next game, you got Jack Flaherty taking on Jordan Lyles. This game is in Busch Stadium. Flaherty not that great last time out. His price is back down to $8,300. Guy with some strikeout upside in the spot, 26% strikeout rates. Hard contact has been up to both sides of the plate, mainly the lefties. A little bit of concern, but we tend to kind of see that when guys rely on a little bit more off-speed stuff, which we've seen. Low 90s fastball, low 90s sinker. It's got that slider that's decent, 40% whiff rate on it, throws it about 28% of the time. That's obviously a number that we'd like against him, against the Padres team that just awful against sliders. The only contact bat that they have is really Jose Perella, 71%. Manuel Margot, 74% as well. But the rest of these contacts are right in 60-65% range. Even against the fastball, they're not particularly great against it. I mean, you got a couple guys like Hosmer and Franmil Reyes and and Corey Spangenberg against this range of fastball. But overall, I feel pretty comfortable with Jack Flaherty tonight. Solid SP2, GPP SP1. Obviously, a Padres team projected lineup 292 WOBA, 135 ISO, 25% strikeout rate against right-handers. Cardinals at home. It is a hot and humid night, which obviously usually bodes well for hitters, but nothing tremendously stands out here for this Padres side. And obviously, they should get some run support with Lyles on the other one. But good spot here for Flaherty. I don't mind going back, even coming off a rough outing. You can certainly go here. Other side of things, you got Jordan Lyles on the slate. Hard contact, extremely up to right-handed hitters, 43% this year, 35% fly ball rate. Even lefties, he's pitched kind of somewhat well, but there is some pretty glaring stats, especially once some of these off-speed stuff that really aren't that great get hit a little bit more. But in his fastball range that he's still throwing about 35% of the time, you're looking at a lot of guys that just absolutely crush. Matt Carpenter, 372 WOBA, Tommy Pham, 520 WOBA, Jose Martinez, 41 WOBA, Ozuna, Yadier Molina, Dexter Fowler, Colton Wong, all over 380 WOBA against his fastball range. And even a couple guys against, curveballs. Matt Carpenter, 375 WOBA, 227 ISO. You do have Marcell Ozuna, who's got a 222 ISO. So a couple of guys that do stand out against Lyles here. But given the hard contact to right-handers, 43% this year, definitely don't mind Pham, Martinez, Yadi. These guys are all in play and all fairly cheap. I mean, Pham and Martinez priced up a little bit, but compared to where Pham was maybe a couple of weeks ago, up around 5K, this is kind of cheap for him. And Matt Carpenter leading off, he's 3-3 over on DraftKings. Fowler 3-3, so you got some interesting value. If you need Colton Wong as well, he's 2-8 at second base. When you date back to last year, Lyles did struggle a little bit more to left-handers, 365 WOBA, 207 ISO, two righties, 361 WOBA, 225 ISO. So you can certainly look at the Cardinals here. The only thing that sucks is obviously the ballpark. They are a better road hitting team, especially in the power department. But on an 8-game slate, we can certainly look to go here. Pittsburgh, Arizona next. Two viable pitchers in this game. You got Joe Musgrove on the road in the spot. 280 WOBA to lefties, 289 WOBA to righties this season. Strikeout stuff right around 20-22%. Mixing in a lot of good pitches here. He's not relying on the fastball as much, but it's a decent fastball, 93 miles an hour, throws about 40% of the time, 22% whiff rate on that pitch. Slider changeup easily too. If his best swing and miss is 50% whiff rate on that slider, 37% on that changeup. Throwing the cutter, sinker, good out pitches here, especially that sinker, 62% ground ball rate, not getting a lot of whiffs, but expected WOBA is rather low. This Arizona team coming out of Coors, you did have guys like Paul Goldschmidt, Jake Lamb, John Ryan Murphy, all these guys that have been hitting well of late, finally getting going. Still a lineup that has some strikeouts in it, especially against right-handers, 24.1%. You do have Goldschmidt and Lamb and Descalso and Ahmed, and if Avila's in the lineup for some reason, he would be a guy that strikes out a ton. And overall, we've seen Chase Field play more towards pitchers this year, which had that effect as predicted. Musgrove's definitely interesting here. Hard to bet him on a win, but 8,500 is an interesting DK play. If you want to use him on FanDuel, you can certainly go ahead there as well. His price tag's not all that bad, 7,500. You can load up on hitters and just hope he gets that quality start and hope maybe some Pirates bats get to Corbin, but overall Musgrove solid in play here. Like I said, this Diamondbacks team, it's not tremendously great coming out of Coors. I'm still not ready to trust them as a consistent offense. So you can look to use Musgrove here in this spot. If I'm targeting against him, it's with the lefties, just because the hard contact's been there. It's Descalso, it's Jake Lamb, it's David Peralta. All these guys over at 200 ISO. Against right-handers, those will be the bats I'm really looking to use. Goldschmidt at 5K, I'm going to be probably looking a little other directions, but if you want to ride the hot streak, you can certainly do so there. Pittsburgh side of things, Patrick Corbin, come off a solid start. He's 11-2. Like him in GPPs. Going to be looking elsewhere in cash games. This is still a Pirates team that's pretty good against left-handers, and they're a good contact team. Especially against that slider. I know, Corbin's slider he's relied on quite a bit this year, but the contact rate's mostly up around the 70% range. Not a lot of guys stand out against it. no one hits it particularly well. That could be a little bit of a problem. I don't have a tremendous amount of interest in the Pittsburgh bats. I mean, outside of maybe a Starling Marte 289 ISO against lefties this year, you can certainly look at one of the catchers, Diaz 261 ISO. I know Cervelli 194 ISO against lefties as well this year. Sean Rodriguez, he's been the guy who's been hitting lefties well, 412 over 265 ISO. All interesting kind of value GPP plays. I'm not expecting a ton of runs in this game, but you can certainly look at the one-offs. It's mostly the lefties in Arizona, a couple right-handed bats for Pittsburgh. But overall, I have more interest in these pitching options than I do the hitters. Last game of the night, LA and Seattle. Wade LeBlanc take on Andrew Heaney. Heaney's obviously a guy who's pitched pretty well. GPP guy tonight here. Problem for me is he's still allowing a lot of hard contact and fly balls to righties. 35% hard contact rate, 39% fly ball rate, 26% line drive rate. A little bit concerned. He's been dominant against lefties. I don't really have interest in any of the lefties here against him, but if you're looking to get contrarian, I think Gene Segura is interesting. 372 WOBA against lefties this year. Mitch Haniger, 365 WOBA, 194 ISO. Nelson Cruz, 308 ISO, 399 WOBA. That's back to what he's usually been doing. Ryan Healy, 310 WOBA, 224 ISO, but obviously a guy that we like in terms of a track record against left-handed pitching. Looking for guys who hit sinkers well here with Heaney. Obviously, Mitch Haniger, 374 WOBA. Nelson Cruz, 404 WOBA. Ryan Healy struggles a little bit against the pitch. Does make some decent contact, though, 87%. These are names that kind of particularly stand out. And obviously, if you're looking for guys that hit curveballs well, not a lot here. That's something that Heaney throws. So quite a bit, about 24% this year, 43% whiff rate. He's got that curveball that he can lean on at times. With that being said, though, the sinker only a 36% ground ball rate. So if he leans on that more, I think Seattle has a couple interesting options that you can use in this spot. LA side things here against LeBlanc. Don't have a lot of interest. Guy's been limiting hard contact. He does give up a decent amount of fly balls. I want the guys that hit changeups here well, just because it is a pitch that he throws about 30% of the time. And particularly, he just gets guys out with it, and it's kind of frustrating. But Mike Trout, as usual, but the problem is he's 6K, 438 WOBA, 353 ISO against that changeup. Justin Upton, 248 ISO against that changeup. He's a guy who's been heating up. We know his track record against lefties, over 43% hard contact rate against this year. Zach Cozart's another one who's been seeing the ball well, due for some positive regression against lefties, 41% hard contact rate. Kinsler finally getting going. So if you want to jump on these guys while they're all cheap, you can certainly do so. If you need some platoon bats in the back half of the lineup, like Jeffrey Marte, Martin Maldonado, Chris Young, you can certainly look here. I know two lefties here don't usually present a ton of damage allowed, but I kind of do like some offense and one-offs and two-offs in this game here, especially as a late-night hammer, just because things are pretty limited to about the Cubs and Indians and Giants on this slate. We're not looking at a ton of straightaway, offenses where things are going to mix and match. So you can certainly look to do so there. Home run calls for me today, I am looking at Jose Ramirez. In terms of a cheap one-off that could go overlooked, it's going to be Ryan Healy for me. So that's it for us. Well, I'll be back tomorrow. Brent will be back on the pod, and we'll see you guys soon.